The thing with ADHD is your executive function skills are impaired. You remember things when you kinesthetically, which means
Absolutely.
movement, are writing it by hand.
So now my handwriting is terrible because I almost never actually write anything. I type everything. My iPad's got a pen with it. And so if I have to write something down, I almost feel like I've forgotten, literally. Like,
You asked about growing out of it.
welcome to the Illuminating Wisdom podcast. I'm your host, Marcia Narine Welton, and I'm a lawyer, business strategist, corporate trainer, and executive coach. Each week, I'm going to bring you my favorite entrepreneurs, thought leaders, legal professionals, and other coaches who will inspire, educate, and empower you. Hi, Cheri. I'm so happy to have you here. Not only are you an expert in a topic that I know nothing about, but we're also co-authors in a new book, which has just come out. So I'm thrilled to have you here today. So we're talking about something that I did not realize that so many people were affected by, which is dysgraphia. And it's my understanding that over a third of the population deals with this. So for our listeners who have no idea what this is, what is it? And how is it different from dyslexia? Because I think we've all heard of dyslexia, but we may not have heard of dysgraphia. So what is it?
So dyslexia is the sister to dysgraphia and dyscalculia. So there's three of them. Dyslexia is a disability in reading. Dysgraphia is a disability in writing. Dyscalculia is a disability in mathematics. Now, there is a fourth one, but because of the way it affects you neurologically, it is elsewhere in the DSM-5. So the DSM-5 is like the Bible of mental health. It's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. Say that 3 times fast and it doesn't work. So dysgraphia is that middle sister. And the reason I am focusing on the dysgraphia is because everybody knows about this piece that has to do with the reading, but they blend reading right into writing, and it's a different neurological process. And what researchers have found is when you are reading, different parts of your brain light up than when you're writing. Different parts of your brain light up when you are doing math. Different parts of your brain are lighting up when you are doing something that is oral, like we are doing here in this conversation. Mm-hmm. So I have focused on helping parents understand the writing part, because when I actually published my book, Handwriting, Brain Body Disconnect, there was like one other book that even mentioned the word dysgraphia that I could find in all of Amazon. So I was kind of a pioneer. And since that point in time, more books have been published on isolating the dysgraphia, the writing part of the sisters. But not enough is understood about it. And how does it differ from the reading? And so a lot of my research and my courses are helping differentiate the difference between all three of them.
So we have parents that are listening in. How do they even know if their child is dealing with dysgraphia? And do you grow out of it? So give a little bit of how do I know I have it or I don't have the dyscalculia? I don't know if I have that or not. I just know I mix up the numbers all the time. There's not a time that I write down a number that I don't write it backwards, that I don't have to type in combinations several times. Is that a disability, or is that just I'm clumsy with my fingers and I just don't get it right? That's a lot of questions in one.
It could be a little bit of both. So how does somebody know if they have dysgraphia? The very simple, easy diagnosis of it is, and I am not a diagnostician, so I can't say that this is a diagnosis, but from an experiential perspective, if your handwriting is illegible or it is slow as molasses in January, as they say, it's much slower than your peers, it's something to get looked at. Now, when somebody is reading, so I'll open a book and it's slow, effort-filled, and you're concentrating on like single letters instead of concentrating on words or sentences and making understanding. And then you go to write something down in relationship to what you just read, and you're looking at it going, whoa. But it's not just the handwriting that's the problem. It's
Mm-hmm.
computer generated writing. It's using your phone and texting somebody. It's all of those different parts of expression. Technically, it's a disability in written expression. So it's any form of writing. What the DSM 5 says is grammar's a problem, punctuation's a problem, capitalization's a problem, spelling's a problem, clarity's a problem,
Mm.
paragraphs are kind of all over the place, but there's more components to it. And I just got off an interview with one of the renowned researchers, and he said that the functional MRIs that people are doing,
Mm-hmm.
you asked about growing out of it. Once you understand phonological awareness, which is the basic foundation of reading, and then you can convert those to understand symbols in a book, that you can put those symbols together to create words, those words together to create sentences, and then paragraphs. It lights up different parts of the brain more
Right.
efficiently. So, can you
Ah.
grow out of it? You can get better. There's always going to be this capacity that you might reach that is a little bit difficult. As a sufferer myself, I struggled through all of school to write things down like I could copy with no problem. My handwriting was immaculate as long as I was copying. My
Hmm.
handwriting was pretty good even if I was taking a test, but my paragraph articulation, my ability to get to that communication skill, even to public speak, that was a little bit of a challenge. And by working at it, I've written a book. Now, well, two plus actually four, but we won't count there yet. But
Be tough
but it
when you're like, how many books have I written? Two, three, four. Most people
I
can't
you
even write
know
a sentence together. Like, my third book, my fourth book.
yeah. So I mentioned handwriting brain body disconnect. I just happen to have it here in my lap. Handwriting brain body disconnect was published in 2019. You and I talked about or you mentioned that we contributed to a book together. That is called
Hmm.
Becoming You. And
Hmm.
the difference with the two books is Handwriting Brain Body Disconnect is a technical resource of interventions for teachers, parents, and therapists. Becoming You is my story and how I went from this person who wanted to commit suicide to going, now I don't want my kids to find me, and I really need to do something with myself that is beyond this rote every day mundane existence that I was even though I was an occupational therapist and I loved what I was doing, it was just everything put together. I was just like, there's got to be something more. And from that and some self discovery, I've actually discovered the acronym LEAD. And I think I talked about this on Saturday. And LEAD means love with excellence, abundance, and diligence. And the reason I got to that point is when we talk about dysgraphia, we talk about the disability part, but to overcome it, I needed
Hmm.
to get to the point of loving myself, understanding that there was excellence inside of me, even with the struggle, that there's abundance of materials out there to help me. And I need to be diligent and consistent every day to overcome the struggle. And so that's part of where I have led myself. And then what I teach the teachers is impact. And impact stands for intention, metacognition, perspective, action, consistency, and transcendence. And that's just a way of expressing how to direct their interventions and their strategies that they're helping the students so that the
Mm-hmm.
students can overcome the challenges that they have. Did that answer your question?
It does, but there was a lot in there, and I don't want to gloss over something you started with. Tell us how bad the struggle was that made you want to consider taking your life, even though you are an occupational therapist and had not the training maybe in this, but how you were struggling, because as we know, suicide is, the leading or second leading, depending on which age group, cause of death for young people in the United States. And it's, obviously a problem worldwide. And I can imagine that you've got young people in school, or even people who are, I teach law students and college students, but people who are young in school who feel like I'm not getting this. I'm supposed my parents are so smart. Maybe they've been tested and it's not ADHD. They don't know what it is. And that has got to be, terrible from an esteem perspective. And with the mental health crisis we're already dealing with, so if you wouldn't mind, tell us a little bit more about that story, because I think it's going to be helpful for parents and also for people to say that, okay, they're not alone. Because like I said, I had never heard of this. And then to find out that 1 in 3 people deals with this, I cannot imagine, I'm so glad you're doing the work of training teachers and others, because I cannot imagine what it might be like. I joke about, well, I'm always getting the numbers wrong, but I can still function. But nothing that's made me want to say, hey, am I really as bright as I think I am? Or can I make it? Or do I even need to be here? So do you mind talking a little bit more about that?
I'll share one of the stories, and I think I might have shared this in Becoming You. I may have pulled it out. So if this is new to you, it's probably because I pulled it out. I was in my freshman year undergrad. So this is way back, long before I even thought about becoming an occupational therapist, because my first degree was totally different.
Hmm.
And I was trying to do a 2-page paper. And in those days, we used an electric typewriter and onion paper to create a paper. It was a two
I
page
remember those days.
paper. You remember those days? It was a
I
two
remember those
page
days.
paper. And I went through an entire 25-page ream. You know how they come in those
Hmm.
packets of like 25 pages? Well, I went through an entire 25 pages to get 2 pages typed. And there were so many erasures on each one of the pages. I kept going back and hitting the erase button, and it was so frustrating. It took me all night long. And at that time, I was taking a course from home. Now, yes, in those days, you didn't do virtual anything, but so I was at home working on it, and my mom's going, "Are we going to be able to sit down to eat soon?" And I'm like in tears. So that was kind of this start of moving from high school, where things were kind of still spoon
Hmm.
fed to me, to
Right.
trying to articulate something and struggling to get a sentence written. And it just went from there to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. And my self-esteem, my self-confidence, they were in the toilet, as they say. They were just in bad shape. And it took becoming a mom, well, okay, graduating several times, becoming a mom, trying to participate in those volunteer activities at church, and trying to find my voice, my place, my existence in life. And it was like I felt like I was going nowhere.
Mm.
And I had had a fight with my husband, and I was like, this is the last straw. I left the house, left the kids at home, and I just drove down the interstate, because I live about 3 miles from an interstate. Just kept driving, just kept driving. All of a sudden, I was at a hotel. And then, like, my brain connected and went, what are you doing? If you go inside there and you do follow through with anything, this isn't going to be good for your kids.
Hmm.
So, with a much in my gut, I returned home. So, I was probably gone about 3 hours, because till my brain decided to come to, it was a good hour and a half drive away from the house, and
Wow.
come back. And then it was like, okay, now what? And I still wasn't over it the next morning. I just sobbing at the side of my bed going, okay, you need to change. Because if you don't make yourself change, nobody else is going to help you change. And that was the start of my self discovery is I knew that if I didn't change myself, I wasn't going to be able to help anybody else. And it was through that self discovery that I actually started helping my kids. And I'm not talking about my two biological, I'm talking about all of my kids. Because as I said to my husband, is like, I have 100 kids at a time. Um, and so,
In your role as an occupational therapist, I'm
in my
assuming.
role as an occupational
Yeah.
therapist, and
Okay.
yeah, and so I was started to really at that point really take a look at what was going on with the kids and trying to make that distinction between the ADD, the ADHD, the autism, the sloppy handwriting, and trying to put it all together and distinguish what was really going on. So it started out with self awareness, trying to help my students, and then it turned into, oh, yeah, I really need to help the teachers understand that they need to look at things from a different perspective because if they're teaching the kids to overcome their self esteem
Mhm.
and their self confidence, these kids are going to have the courage to overcome the dysgraphia as well.
So how do you distinguish? I'm sure there's some parents listening that say, okay, I'm now learning about dysgraphia for the first time. How do you distinguish? And I know you're not a diagnostician, can't even say the word. You don't
It's okay.
diagnose. Okay, but between ADD, ADHD, sloppy handwriting, dysgraphia. I know I've got the sloppy handwriting from the time I was in first grade. I was a disaster with the thing, but I was also a disaster with math. So after this, I want to talk about the connection with handwriting and math because I didn't even realize
Mm.
there was one. So if I'm a parent and I'm sitting there thinking, all right, is it ADD, ADHD, dysgraphia, bad handwriting, my kid's just lazy? How do you know? Or what are some distinctions that you can think of?
So, the first thing that I want to say about ADHD and ADD is they're basically the same thing. One has a little bit of more hyperactivity than the other
Hmm.
one. But the
Hmm.
best thing to think about is the thing with ADHD is your executive function skills are impaired. The best resource that I know that's out there to get an initial understanding is the book Smart But Scattered. The book Smart But Scattered is written by, let me look, Peg Dawson, because it's right behind the camera. So sorry, I'm looking away.
Feel
And
free.
Richard Guare. Um, so Gware and Peg Dawson, Dawson. That is a good place to start. And basically, the ADD is the neurological condition. The functional condition is the dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia. The ADD is really the thing that's preventing you of access. If ADD is not the problem, and that is diagnosed by a neuropsychologist, a pediatric developmental pediatrician, or somebody on that realm. If
Right.
that is not the problem, and you're still having the reading, writing, and math issues, then you want to really look at, well, is there another neurological, ruling out all the neurological disorders that you can possibly rule out? It's a developmental delay. So your brain is not processing as efficiently as your neighbors or a typical peer.
Hmm.
It's a big difference with it is really going to the pediatrician, getting that developmental pediatrician or that neuropsychologist to take a look and really dive down to make that differential diagnosis. I have a list on my website of the neuropsychologists around the country. Um, and you can go in there and you can narrow it down to where your person is. I don't know that it's international. It may be, but it's just directly out of the neuropsychology website. So whoever happens to be in there will be
Hmm.
on that website. And then from
So
there,
we'll put a list before you go on. We will put a link to the books that you just mentioned, as well as to your website and even a hyperlink to that page for our listeners so they can access it quickly. Because
sure.
I know the next question is like, where do I get started? How do I do this? So please keep
Mm-hmm.
going.
So please keep going. So, where do you get started? The first thing you want to do is just get some understanding of what are some of the symptoms. Some of the symptoms are on my website, they are on the parents page or the professional page. So, if you're a parent, go there. On that page, there's also a download that's free that you can access. So, if your child is in public school, there's also some information there on what you might want to talk about in the public school setting. If your child is in private school, you can convert some of those questions to be more of a for a private school program. I also talk with homeschool parents. I don't have a handout for them, but if you go to Homeschool OT, which is a friend of mine, she has a plethora of OT stuff that's converted. So she really talks more about how to deal with the dysgraphia from a homeschool perspective, and I leave her take that role, and I'll
Hmm.
tell describe the what it is part, and then she'll take how to deal with it in the homeschool setting. So her name is Sarah Collins, and she is the homeschool OT. Man, am I throwing a lot of stuff out there
We're
for
gonna, don't
you?
worry, that's why we got a transcript and we can get this all there. But let me ask you this. Imagine I'm a parent and I'm driving right now to pick up my kid from school. I'm like, oh, I can go speak to Ms. Jackson right now. What are two or three questions? Somebody's like, I can't wait to even get to her website. I need to know right away. What are two or three
Mhm.
things that, assuming you have a K through 12 in the United States, so up through high school, question that a parent should ask their teacher or guidance counselor right away to start getting the ball rolling on this, in addition to saying my child may need to be looked at for this,
Mhm.
but what are some kinds of questions that they should have? Because a lot of times parents today aren't as involved in their kids homework, so they may not even realize the struggles, and they may be getting progress reports from their teachers, but they may not. So assuming they're
Mhm.
not necessarily getting all the progress reports, they may not be seeing the homework. What are some things that they should ask? Is are you seeing my kid do this? Are you hearing this? What would those questions be?
So think about illegible handwriting and speed with the peers. Think about those two areas, and you can go from there. So one of the things that you can do is you can compare. Say they're in elementary school. Excuse me. When you're in elementary school, you have those signs up, the work projects in the hallway during parent night. Look, compare yours kids with another child of the same sex. Don't compare girl to boy to girl kind of a
Really?
thing,
There's
because
differences?
but because a girl is going to develop at a different rate than a boy. Girls tend
Okay.
to have their fine motor skills in place a little bit sooner than the boys. It's just a matter of fact. So take a look at a couple of the boys in the room if your child is a boy and go, oh, yeah, well, his handwriting is, ooh, much better. Ooh, yeah, no, my kid's handwriting isn't feeling that. And so from that, ask the teacher, are you seeing any differences in my child's performance? One of the most times, that first parent night is when the parents are finding out that there's a real problem.
Right.
There's a difference between K1 and 2 versus third grade. Third grade is that cutoff where we've got through the basics, and we should know at least somehow how to write a sentence and write a paragraph. Because by the end of kindergarten, no, first grade, sorry, wrong grade. By the end of first grade, kids should be able to write 25 words, which means five word sentences to create a
Hmm.
paragraph. So, one, if they're not doing that much and they're in first grade and we're at the end of the school year, yeah, something to be concerned about. So that's why we can look at speed is, are they writing similar amount of stuff. If homework is taking, and they're really trying to do homework, mind you, if homework is taking more than 20 minutes per grade, so in first grade, it should take about 20 minutes to complete homework. In second grade, it should take, add 10 minutes, about 30 minutes to complete homework. If it's not following the national average for homework, think about asking more questions. The What is Dysgraphia handout that's on my website can go through some of those frequently asked questions that you might go, yeah, I need to look at this further. But the best way to get some support is to fill out a parent request for evaluation. So handing that in to the teacher and CCing the special ed director, the principal, and the superintendent, making sure that they all know that you would like your child evaluated. And I would be as detailed as possible. I am seeing this, I am seeing this, I am seeing this. Can you please evaluate for those areas? And that typically means more than just the school psychologist. That might mean the speech therapist, the occupational therapist, possibly even physical therapist, depending on the situation in your school district. So when I say that, you're asking for a comprehensive evaluation from the school psychologist, speech therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist. And then from there, when you get the report back, then you can start asking more questions. In the meantime, you could find a special ed advocate if you really want to know more. And there's two companies that help with special education advocacy. One is the National Special Education Advocacy Institute, and the other one, I don't know, it's COPA. I'm not exactly sure what COPA stands for anymore, but what I like about the National Special Education Advocacy Institute is it takes it from a case management perspective, and it treats the IEP like a case manager would in, say, a healthcare setting. So we're looking at all the parts and the pieces, and we're like, what does it look like? How can we help that area of need? And it really looks at it from that perspective versus, sorry, Marcel, the law perspective. Because
No,
what the
trust
I
me, don't worry about insulting me as a lawyer. That's okay. It's all right. I'm a
and so
parent first.
COPA is more, what are the details about the law? So they're teaching you the different aspects of the law. And for me, I needed that practical intervention. So what I found was I was also, even though I was struggling, let's get this out correctly, my kids also had some areas of struggle they were doing with their writing. And long and short of it is I had to have IEPs for both kids.
Is it hereditary?
It's genetic, but they haven't found the gene yet. But they know
Okay.
there's if parent has it, most likely the child's going to have it, most likely the grandchild's going to have it, et cetera, et cetera. Yes.
So imagine, and by the way, for those of you listening, this says, okay, that's way too much information. I've got to pull over from my car and get out of traffic to write everything down. We're going to have links to everything that Cheri's mentioned in the show notes that you can go back and you can get the handouts. You can see the resources. So don't fret because this has been chock full of information. So what are some things that you tell parents to do at home? The child has the dysgraphia diagnosis. What do they do at home? And maybe it's not a child. Maybe it's a college or a law student listening to this. They go, what are some things that they can do? Because you're not going to grow out of it. Obviously, I'm assuming there's no medication for it, and we wouldn't necessarily want to put medication for everything anyway. So what are some of the coping skills that people need, and how do they deal with it?
Believe it or not, physical exercise.
Really?
Flow was created by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and one of the things about flow is kids with any disability based function, if we can get them into a flow state, we are going to get them to engage. So a flow state is where like you're in the zone where time
Mm-hmm.
passes and you don't even realize what's going on. The big thing that's going to help kids re-engage to get back into a flow cycle is that recovery period. And that recovery period is the part that is going to make the difference. One of the things that I've discovered in my research is that you need to engage in anything that is going to create that cognitive output, whether it's oral or written. A little bit of physical exercise right beforehand is going to be so much better. So, if
Hmm.
you got a kid who's having trouble, have them do 10 jumping jacks and then come back to the paper. Have them do some wall push ups if they can't do a regular push up. Have them take out the trash because the trash is heavy. Anything that's going to add a little bit of resistance or weight, especially to the upper body. Now, jumping jacks, not so
Hmm.
much unless you're adding some weights to your hands. But if you add some weight into your upper body, it's going to help kick in the muscles in your upper body so that they're prepared for writing.
That is fascinating to me. I can't believe it. So there's a connection between dysgraphia and math, and how does that work? And why does that work? Because again, I am the messy handwriting, so I'm still trying to figure out. I don't think it takes me long to write, so I don't think dysgraphia is my issue, but I am that messy handwriting person, have always been since first grade, since everybody's like, why can't I get my letters to look like that? And I just had a complete disconnect with math throughout my life. So am I dysgraphia adjacent? What is this? So what does this mean?
The foundation of math is understanding number. It's called number sense. Number sense is basically understanding the relationship between one number and another number.
Hmm.
And if you're struggling with that connection, that'll be where the math comes in. Anytime you go to write it down, that's the written expression. So whether you're writing a letter, you're writing a number, you're writing an equation, it really doesn't matter. Writing it down
Hmm.
is written expression. So the
Hmm.
connection with reading, with writing and math has to do with how well you're writing it down and how legible it is. If it's not legible, we go back to the dysgraphia. But understanding the concept of math really has to do with understanding the relationship between one number and another number. And one of the ways that I help kids was with understanding numbers myself. We use dots. Business partner and I use dots. We call them quick dots to help understand the concepts. So she's looking at it from the mathematical relationship perspective and understanding the number sense. I'm looking at, okay, so they go to write it down. What does it look like? What are some of the visual perceptual components that are there that are affecting it? So the connection with the writing and we're talking maybe geometric shapes and things like that is what are they understanding visual perceptually and how is the motor function refined enough to make those connections. So really it has to do with connecting those foundational biomechanical, bioelectronic neurobiology together. And the basics are visual perception, visual motor, auditory connections, and memory skills. Most of these kids that have these disabilities, their memory skills are not up to snuff. That's part of the main thing that's happening with these kids is they can't remember to get it from up here down here. There's a disconnect between thinking it and writing it.
So there's a whole lot of science in that answer. And I want to go to the next part about science because you've been talking about writing it down, but with the advent of technology. So now my handwriting is terrible because I almost never actually write anything. I type everything, my iPad's got a pen with it. And so if I have to write something down, I almost feel like I've forgotten, literally, like I will take
Mhm.
notes handwriting and I can't even read my own handwriting, which is already terrible, as I told you, since first grade, but at least it was quasi legible to me. Now I can't read my own. So with more kids or adults just typing and everything, how does dysgraphia relate to typing? Because you've been saying writing and motor skills, and I'm wondering if there's a connection or the dysgraphia, people with dysgraphia should just type instead. So I know you've talked about why people should use typewriters,
Mhm.
which now who knows if you can find one of those, but let's say computers.
So there is a connection, and
Mm-hmm.
the connection really has to do with expressing yourself in written form, whether it's with a
Okay.
pencil, whether it's with a computer, whether it's with a
Okay.
phone. It really doesn't matter. It's that connection. What they're finding is, from a memory standpoint, that you remember things when you kinesthetically, which means movement,
Absolutely.
are writing it by hand versus typing notes. So if you have a high school kid and they're typing notes, that is a good way to remember notes.
Mm-hmm.
However, they did find in research that writing it down does help. There are so many assisted devices out there. There's pens that you can write, but they're also listening, and they're converting it, making a transcript, and with your handwritten notes, they mesh them together. How it does it, I
Wow.
don't know, but there are so many different tools out there. Um, Otter AI is one that will take
Mm-hmm.
an oral conversation and create a transcript. When I'm working, most of my kids are like less than eighth grade. So I don't
Right.
get into the high school kids and the college kids as much, but I tell them the same thing as I'm telling the eighth graders is if you're struggling and you remember it orally, use the phone, use Otter
Yeah.
AI, talk into it, create the transcript. Sometimes Otter AI will correct your sentences. Not always, but sometimes.
Right.
And then, depending on what the purpose of the activity is, you with the younger kids, I will either create what they're supposed to write and create a writing sample, so they're going to copy it. Or we dictate. I hide the transcript and they only see the audio and they have to start and stop the audio and remember like two or three words to write them down.
Mm-hmm.
Or we listen to the whole thing again. Okay, now what's your interpretation of what you just said? Create a new sentence from that. And that is called self generation sentences. So we really look at, from this child's perspective, what they can recall. As your kid, talking about kids in higher ed, the more that they can have permission to record,
Mm-hmm.
create the transcript, and then go back and highlight the important things. But I will tell you this, kids with ADHD won't want to highlight too much. So we need to teach them appropriate highlighting skills, teach them study skills. They don't learn it innately, it has to be taught explicitly. So the four words with intervention are explicit, systematic, cumulative, and multisensory. And those are the four areas that I try to incorporate into all my interventions because they help with the dyslexia, the dysgraphia, the dyscalculia, and the oral apraxia.
Wow. So you do so much for, I'm sure that you are a godsend to parents, to teachers, and to students. How do you keep yourself centered? Do you have some kind of a morning or evening routine that no matter how tired you are, no matter what, you're going to do it? And before you answer the question, I know some people are like, I've got to come up with some amazing, I meditate at sunrise morning routine. You might be like, nope, I roll out of bed and I go to work. That's fine too. But just curious, because I think, especially when we serve so many other people, and I know this is something that you've talked about. I've seen you talk about it publicly about taking care of yourself and showing yourself some love as well. How do you do that for yourself, and so that you can give some tips to some other people out there?
Sure. I've been struggling with fibromyalgia, so I've had to stop working directly with kids because getting down on the floor and working with
Hmm.
some kids on the floor was just getting to be too painful. And so I've had to find ways to still get exercise. And I've been looking at apps because I just don't want to go to the gym every day. I'm just not a go to the gym and
Right.
have everybody watch me working. It's just not happening. Um, I have a daily yoga app and I have Just Fit. My Just
Mm-hmm.
Fit, I have intentionally made it for the bed only part. It's not that I don't want to do the other exercises, but first thing in the morning to get that morning stretch, I do Just Fit, and it's the app on the iPhone. The yoga then is where I'm up and I'm standing and I'm doing some more activities with the yoga. I take a morning walk.
Mm-hmm.
I have Bible time, and then
Mm-hmm.
I also have reading time. So that's something about neuroscience, it's something about business, it's something about marketing, it's something about um, some uh, research article. It doesn't matter what it is. There's always some
Mm-hmm.
kind of reading that happens. And lately, I've also had a new friend that has come to our house who wants to have mom time. So that is my new four-legged creature, my
Aw,
little guy. And if I could turn my computer,
sure.
I'm
I'd
going
love to
to,
see
I'm
you do
going to,
that.
I'm going to. Voila, there he is.
Aw,
My
beautiful.
little office manager, he's sitting here and he's behaving today. Um, he likes to be on my lap at about twice a day. So I've had to adjust my schedule a little bit to incorporate his anxiety. And that's usually when I do my reading time. So he gets his mom time and I get my reading time. But I do try to balance. In the evening, there's not as much of a routine. It's crash. It's go to bed because
Oh, yeah.
I've worked
Yeah.
pretty much intently all day long. The other thing that I have done is I've bought a standing desk so I could hit the button, which would be loud in the speaker, but my entire desk, microphone and all, goes up or comes back down. And so right at the moment I am sitting, but I do alternate about every 45 minutes or so, sit to stand, and I will work
Mm-hmm.
standing up as well.
Excellent. And you've got your four-legged friend. People should realize that there's a benefit to petting a cat or a dog or an animal as you work because it really is good for centering and helping to calm the nervous system. So that you're getting some self-care in there too, even though you're adjusting. So Cheri, you've given
Mm-hmm.
so much information as an occupational therapist, as a dysgraphia expert. If people want to work with you, and of course we're going to put links in the show notes, but for the people that might be listening, how can they work with you? And who specifically are you serving now, since you said you're not doing direct service with kids?
Correct. I'm creating professional development for teachers and therapists. My
Mhm.
website is my name, CheriDotterer.com. It's CheriDotterer for those of you who are listening just audio. I also have my own podcast, and that is The Writing Glitch. So you can find more information at The Writing Glitch. Um, but those are basically the two websites that I have right now. I I am moving my courses from in the probably till the end of the year from a platform that I've been using to a new platform. So
Mhm.
I actually have also created disabilitylabs.com. So that's where
Nice.
all my courses are going to eventually be held by the end of the year. And the reason I moved them is because of the platform. The platform that I'm
Mm.
currently using, a lot of my clients don't like it. So I'm trying to find something that my clients will like that are they're more used to using. So I'm moving to a platform that's going to be much more user friendly for the client.
Fantastic. Well, Cheri Dotterer, it's been a pleasure. I have learned a ton, and I know that our listeners have as well. Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention. And again, 33% of people are dealing with this right now, and you may not know it. So if it's you, if it's an employee, if you're a teacher, if you are a student, if you are a frustrated parent that doesn't know what's going on, please reach out, look at Cheri's materials, and get yourself educated. Thanks so much, Cheri, and everyone stay tuned for the next episode. Take care. Thanks so much for joining us. Stay tuned for the next episode. If you like what you heard, subscribe and share it with others.